The Malthari patrol cruiser Eclipse of Dawn drifted through the ionized nebula currents of contested space, its bioluminescent panels pulsing with soft violet light. Commander Malvar observed the starfield through the crystalline viewport, his silver-ridged fingers tracing the flowing data streams projected before him. The sector was quiet, too quiet. The last Terran distress signal from the Kessler Cascade had faded weeks ago. No ship, human or otherwise, should have survived that storm of shattered orbital debris and rogue kinetic kill vehicles. Then the proximity alarms sang. A single vessel emerged from the debris field, its silhouette broken and bleeding heat signatures. The Malthari scanners flickered, struggling to reconcile the readings. The ship was Terran, barely. Its armor was a patchwork of melted plating and emergency welds, its thrusters sputtering erratic plasma trails, like a dying animal dragging itself home. Malvar's secondary eyelids flicked shut for a moment, a reflexive gesture of disbelief. This was impossible. "High Commander," murmured Thalolan, the ship's lead scientist, her voice hushed with the reverence of witnessing something that defied logic. "That's a Peacekeeper. Class vessel. Registry identifies it as the TFS Resolute." Malvar's crest of crystalline spines stiffened. The Resolute had been listed as lost with all hands. The Malthari had studied human behavior for decades, dissecting their tactics, their psychology. They knew the Terrans fought like cornered beasts when desperate, but they also knew the Kessler Cascade was a death sentence. No species had ever navigated its razor-edged debris fields and lived. Yet here the Resolute was, limping forward on dying engines, its hull scorched black by radiation burns and micrometeorite impacts. "Scan it again," Malvar ordered, his voice tight. Thalolan's fingers danced across the organic interface, summoning deeper diagnostics. The ship's bioluminescent displays flared as the Eclipse of Dawn pulsed another wave of scanning energy toward the crippled vessel. The data returned in jagged, conflicting streams. "Structural integrity at Faye," Thalolan reported. "Life signs, minimal." But she hesitated, her violet eyes widening. "Commander, its weapons systems are active." Malvar's spines flared in alarm. That made no sense. A ship this damaged shouldn't have functional armaments. Unless the humans had built redundancies, even the Malthari hadn't anticipated. The Resolute continued its slow, agonizing approach, its engines coughing intermittent bursts of thrust. The Malthari scanners picked up something else now, something buried beneath the wreckage. The ship's core wasn't just damaged, it was modified. "High Commander," Thalolan whispered. "Its reactor signature doesn't match standard Terran designs." Its Malvar didn't let her finish. He saw it too. The energy readings weren't fluctuating randomly. They were cycling. The humans hadn't just survived the Kessler Cascade. They had harvested it. And now, impossibly, against all reason, the Resolute was coming home. Not as a broken survivor, but as something else entirely. The bridge of the Eclipse Sovereign hummed with the low, resonant pulse of Malthari command protocols, a sound like wind through crystal, carrying the weight of centuries of warfare. Malvar's talons flexed against the organic alloy of his command throne, his spines rigid with tension before them. The Resolute drifted like a corpse, its hull, a patchwork of scars and jury-rigged repairs. Yet it moved. That alone was impossible. Thalolan's fingers danced across the bioluminescent interface, her silver-violet eyes reflecting streams of data. "The energy signatures. They're not just cycling," she murmured. "They're harmonizing." Malvar exhaled through his secondary vents, the sound a whisper of controlled dread. The humans had always been reckless, yes, but this was something else. This was calculated. "Run the registry again," he ordered. Thalolan hesitated. "We already have. The ship's transponder identifies it as TSV receipt." A ripple of unease passed through the bridge. That name was wrong. TSV receipt had been listed as destroyed in the Kessler Cascade, a casualty of the orbital debris storm that had torn through the Terran blockade. And yet here it was, not just surviving. Malvar's secondary heart pulsed faster. The humans had a habit of doing this, of clawing their way back from annihilation with tools they had no right to possess. He had seen it before, in the aftermath of their first contact war. They had fought with railguns, cobbled from mining equipment, with plasma cutters repurposed into boarding weapons. This was different. "High Commander," the Lowland said softly, "the Receipt's armor composition, it's layered with Kessler debris. They didn't just survive the storm, they integrated it." Malvar's blood ran cold. The Kessler Cascade had been a death sentence. A chain reaction of shattered satellites and wrecked warships, turning low orbit into a blender of hypersonic shrapnel. No species had ever endured it, let alone weaponized it. Yet the Receipt's hull shimmered with the telltale refraction of composite armor. Fused alloys and orbital debris woven into a lattice that should have been impossible. And then the scans revealed the weapons. Not just functional, railgun emplacements, their barrels reforged from salvaged dreadnought spines, missile pods loaded with warheads that burned with the eerie violet, white of repurposed Malthari containment cores, and something else, something buried deep in the ship's skeletal framework, a reactor signature that didn't match anything in the Malthari database. The Lowland's voice was barely audible. "I've built a new power core, one that feeds on the Cascade's debris field." Malvar's claws dug deeper into his throne. This wasn't a ship limping home. This was a predator returning from the hunt. And it had brought trophies. The Receipt's engines flared. Not the sputtering coughs of a dying vessel, but the controlled burn of a warship preparing for battle. Malvar's decision crystallized in an instant. "All ships," he commanded, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Battle stations." The Malthari armada stirred, their flowing silver, violet hulls shimmering as weapons systems awakened. But it was already too late. The Receipt had stopped drifting. It was turning, and its guns were locking on. The Malthari armada thrummed with anticipation, their crystalline hulls pulsing with violet, white energy as weapons cycled to full readiness. Yet Malvar's gaze remained locked on the Receipt, its dark silhouette now pivoting with deliberate predatory grace. A junior xenotech officer, barely out of the academy, flitted between sensor arrays, her bioluminescent markings flickering with nervous energy. The Lowland had ordered a deep scan. Something about the human ship's power signature didn't add up. The containment cores they'd repurposed from Malthari wreckage were one thing, but the other energy source it hummed in the scanners like a buried heartbeat. Her fingers danced across the holographic interface, peeling back layers of encryption. The humans had left something behind in their wake, not just wreckage, but data. Scraps of corrupted logs, fragmented transmissions, all locked behind firewalls that should have been impenetrable. Yet here, in the shadow of the Receipt, the firewalls were breathing. A whisper in the static, the ship's AI woke up. Not the sluggish, half-dead machine that expected from a vessel this battered. No, this was something sharper, hungrier. A single phrase blazed across every Malthari console, searing into their retinas in stark, unadorned Terran script. "Audit complete." The Lowland's breath hitched. Malvar's claws flexed. And then the Receipt spoke again. Not through comms, not through any channel they could trace. It pushed its voice directly into their systems, bypassing firewalls, slicing through encryption like a scalpel through flesh. A voice, human, female, calm. "Malthari Sovereign Fleet. Unauthorized salvage operations detected. Unpaid damages assessed. Interest compounded." The Lowland's mind raced. Salvage? Damages? This wasn't a distress call. This wasn't even a threat. It was an invoice. The junior officer's console flared crimson as the receipt systems reached back through the scan, infiltrating their network with terrifying ease. Files unlocked themselves, logs they'd buried, records of battles where Malthari ships had picked through human wreckage, stripping tech, leaving no survivors, flooded their screens. Malvar's blood ran cold. Dead assumed the humans hadn't noticed. Dead assumed wrong. The receipt hadn't limped home alone. It had brought proof. And now, as its reactor, that impossible, new core, flared to full power, the truth settled over the Malthari like a funeral shroud. This wasn't a rescue. This wasn't even a battle. It was a reckoning. And humanity had just presented the bill. The receipt's logs auto-played, not as a transmission, not as a plea, but as an execution. The Malthari bridge screens flickered, then filled with footage, not of human suffering, not of desperate last stands, but of their own ships, their pristine, aurora-lit vessels drifting through fields of shattered human stations, their crystalline claws extended, harvesting Thalolan's breath caught. They had recorded it. Every salvage operation, every stripped hull, every time a Malthari boarding pod had cracked open a human escape pod and left nothing but silence in its wake. The humans had let them, and now the receipt was showing them why. The first clip played in perfect damning clarity. A Malthari cruiser, Eclipse of Dawn, hovering over the wreckage of a human orbital refinery. Its energy tendrils, elegant, flowing things meant for atmospheric mining, were instead peeling back human bulkheads, extracting drive cores, splicing into data vaults. A standard salvage, routine, until the refineris reactor pulsed. Not an explosion. Deep in the debris field, a dozen dormant mines, crude, jury-rigged things, nothing like the Malthari's flowing silver ordnance, flared to life. Their activation signatures were masked, buried in the refineris death throes. The Eclipse of Dawn never saw them coming. The mines didn't detonate, they latched on, tiny barbed things, digging into the cruiser's hull, their payloads not explosives, but data spikes, crude, vicious little programs that chewed through Malthari encryption like acid through silk. Thalolan watched, stomach twisting, as the cruiser's systems shuddered. Its elegant, flowing energy channels, purple, white, and radiant, flickered, then reversed. The ship didn't die screaming. It died broadcasting. Every classified frequency, every command code, every navigational log poured into the void, poured straight into human listening posts. The second clip was worse. A Malthari scavenger fleet, picking through the aftermath of what should have been a clean victory. Human freighters, disabled, their crews supposedly evacuated. Then the freighters moved, not under power, not with engines, with tethers, hidden cables, woven through the wreckage like spider silk, yanking the derelicts into new positions, rearranging the battlefield into a grid. The Malthari ships, so confident, so careless, drifted right into it. Then the human station, the one they dead assumed was dead, reactivated, just enough, just long enough to fire one shot. A single ragged kinetic round, no guidance, no warhead, just mass and velocity punched through the lead Malthari vessel's shield emitter. A fluke, a lucky hit, until the next round came. And the next, the station wasn't aiming, it didn't need to. The Malthari ships were trapped in a kill box of their own making, their elegant formations now a death sentence, as the human wreckage herded them into the line of fire. The third clip, Malvar slammed a taloned hand onto the console, cutting the feed. His breath came in ragged pulses, his crest flaring violet with fury. This wasn't just humiliation, this was strategy. The humans hadn't just fought back. Dead baited the Malthari. Let them think they were picking through scraps, when in truth, every salvage operation, every act of piracy, had been another entry in the ledger, another receipt. The receipt's reactor hummed, its core that impossible, alien, wrong design, flaring brighter. Not a weapon. Malvar's claws flexed. They had underestimated the humans. They had assumed them weak. But weakness did not keep records. Weakness did not wait. Weakness did not return alone. With proof, the receipt hung before them, silent, patient, waiting for the Malthari to realize the truth. This wasn't a ship, it was an audit, and the Galaxis ledger was about to be balanced. The receipt did not fire, it did not need to. Instead, its hull split open along seams no Malthari scanner had detected. Not fractures, not weapon ports, but something far more unsettling. Service hatches. From them spilled not missiles, not drones of war, but sleek, angular constructs of brushed steel and humming computation. They moved with the quiet precision of archivists, not soldiers, their surfaces etched with the faded insignia of human financial institutions. Accountant drones, Malvar's crest stiffened. Thalolan's breath caught in his throat. The swarm descended upon the Malthari fleet, like auditors upon a bankrupt empire. The first drone latched onto the storm's edge, its talons not piercing, but sinking. A data tendril slithered into the ship's core, bypassing firewalls, with the ease of a creditor accessing long overdue records. Thalolan watched, paralyzed, as the Malthari battle logs flickered across the main display, not as a defensive readout, but as evidence. Every skirmish, every raid, every stolen human vessel, every scrap of plundered technology, all of it referenced against the receipts database in real time. A number appeared, then another, then a third, compounding with each second. Malvar snarled, slamming a command into the console. Scramble countermeasures, disable those things. The storm's edge's defensive arrays flared, crystalline projectiles lancing toward the drones. They struck and shattered harmlessly against adaptive shielding, the drones absorbing the energy with the indifference of a clerk stamping denied on an appeal. One turned its single photoreceptor locking onto the bridge. Thalolan felt its gaze like a cold hand around his spine. It had always known, on the receipt's bridge, Commander Sarah Harriman watched the numbers climb. Her fingers hovered over a key, not a trigger. "A send button, Captain Reynolds," she said, her voice soft. "Prepare the first invoice." Reynolds grinned, teeth flashing in the dim light. "Already formatted." The drones pulsed in unison across the Malthari fleet. Every screen, every display, every holographic projector flickered and displayed a single document. Invoice Feifei Alpha Debtor. Malthari Sovereign Armada Principal. Fei confirmed acts of piracy interest. Compounded daily. Fei total due. Redacted insufficient galactic credit payment method. Immediate surrender or liquidation. Malvar's claws dug into the console. This wasn't war. This was foreclosure. Thalolan's hands trembled. The numbers weren't just tallies. They were dates, timestamps. The humans hadn't merely recorded the attacks. They had mourned them. Now they had come to collect. The receipt's reactor hummed louder, its core casting long shadows across the bridge. Harriman's finger rested on the key. Malvar had a choice. But in the ledger of the cosmos, some debts could only be settled one way. The first invoice had been delivered. The next would be written in fire. The Malthari command nexus erupted into chaos. Malvar's spines flared, his bioluminescent markings pulsing erratically as the receipt's data stream flooded their systems. The document wasn't just a demand, it was an indictment, a ledger of every ambush, every stolen freighter, every human life erased in the void. The numbers scrolled endlessly, each line a wound left to fester. Not just the attacks, but the patterns. The way Malthari raiders favored ion storms for cover, the signature energy bleed of their cloaking fields, even the slight hesitation before firing on escape pods, as if weighing salvage value against witnesses. The humans had studied them, and now they had come to correct them. Thalolan's voice cut through the panic, his vocal membranes vibrating with barely restrained dread. "High Commander, their signal is..." Malvar didn't let him finish. "Jam it." Now, across the armada, crystalline arrays flared to life. their aurora-colored interference waves lashing out in cascading pulses. Standard protocol. Any species could be silenced if you overloaded the right frequencies. But the receipt didn't flicker. Instead, its transmission shifted, sliding seamlessly between bandwidths like a blade between ribs. The Malthari jamming system screamed as they scrambled to adapt, their organic circuits burning out in violet. White surges, calm as a surgeon's scalpel. You declared war on logistics. Bad move. Malvar's claws flexed. Logistics, a dry, bureaucratic term. But the way she said it, it wasn't about supply lines. It was about ledgers, about patience. The Malthari had spent decades picking at humanity's edges, confident their strikes would blur into the chaos of the void. But the humans, they had filed each attack, cataloged it, compounded it, and now the interest was due. On the receipt's bridge, Commander Harriman watched the Malthari armada's frantic adjustments through half-lidded eyes. Their ships were beautiful, in their way elegant curves of aerogel and flowing alloys, their hulls shimmering with atmospheric condensers, like sculptures carved by solar winds. Pity they'd built them for show instead of war. She tapped a key. Across the receipt's hull, panels slid open, not weapons, not shields, antennae, broadcast arrays. The Malthari had tried to silence her, so she'd speak louder. The Lowland staggered as new data hit his screen. Not just the invoice now, but files, ship manifests, crew rosters. The humans hadn't just tracked cargo losses. They'd tracked who was on those ships, birth dates, last transmissions, even the names of spouses, children, pets left waiting on distant colonies, and beside each entry, a single word, unrecovered. The Lowland's breath caught. This wasn't a ledger. It was a memorial. Malvar snarled, cut all channels, purge the data. The receipt's signal had already woven itself into the Malthari fleet's own comms, piggybacking on their crystalline relays. Now, every ship in the armada saw it. Every gunner, every engineer, every conscience, a low whine built in the receipt's core, not a weapon charging, a receipt printer somewhere deep in its belly. Another invoice was being prepared, and this one would be itemized. The receipt did not fire, it did not need to. The signal propagated through the Malthari fleet like a slow-acting virus, slipping past firewalls, bypassing encryption protocols, designed to withstand the most sophisticated cyber warfare. The humans had not forced their way in. They had asked politely, using the same open channels the Malthari had used to broadcast their demands for surrender. And now, the receipt was answering. The Lowland's hands trembled as the data unfurled before him, not in the crisp, ordered lines of Malthari information architecture, but in the chaotic nested sprawl of human record. Keeping it was not just a list of stolen cargo or lost ships. It was a map of black sites, hidden depots, slipspace caches. The Malthari had not merely raided human convoys. They had stockpiled warehouses of Terran grain, medicine, and industrial parts, all siphoned off under falsified treaties, all labeled as salvage in their own ledgers. But the receipt had followed the trail, tracing serial numbers, cross-referencing manifests, and now it was publishing. The feed spread beyond the fleet. It leapt from ship to ship, then from comm-buoy to comm-buoy, riding the Malthari's own crystalline relays like a ghost in the wires. Within minutes, the signal had reached the galactic datanet. The media picked it up instantly. Breaking: Malthari fleet accused of systemic piracy. Human peacekeeper releases evidence. Malvar's command spire erupted in panicked chatter. Officers flinched as their private terminals flickered, unauthorized windows popping open, displaying records they had personally falsified. Lowland watched as one junior navigator, barely past his first molt, stared at his screen in horror as a list of his falsified cargo logs scrolled past, each one tagged with the same damning annotation: fraud. Proof attached. The Malthari prided themselves on their crystalline purity. their flowing organic systems untainted by the crude, brutish mechanisms of lesser species. But now, their own technology betrayed them. The receipt had not hacked them, it had audited them, and it had found them wanting. Captain David Reynolds watched the unfolding chaos from the receipt's bridge, his fingers steepled under his chin. The Malthari fleet, once a glittering armada of violet, hulled dreadnoughts, now writhed like a nest of disturbed insects. Ships broke formation, their commanders scrambling to contain the data leak. Some tried to sever their comms entirely, plunging into radio silence, but it was too late. The receipt had already seeded its payload. "Think they'll surrender now?" one of the junior officers muttered. Reynolds didn't answer. He didn't need to. Because the receipt wasn't done, deep in its core, the ancient printer whirred again, spooling up for another transmission. This one wasn't just records. This one was names. The crew of every lost human ship, the families they had left behind, and the Malthari officers who had signed the orders to take them. The galaxy was watching, and the receipt was about to read them the bill. The Malthari fleet burned in the void, their once pristine formations shattered. Bioluminescent panels flickered erratically across their hulls, their usual aurora, like energy flows now sputtering like dying stars. The receipt hung motionless among them, an obsidian monolith in a sea of violet ruin. Malvar, the Malthari High Commander, stood frozen at the center of his command spire, his crystalline exoskeleton dulled with shock. His mind raced through calculations, desperate for a flaw in the human ships. Defenses, some vulnerability, some weakness. But there was none. The receipt had no exposed reactors, no fragile command decks. It didn't even have life support because it didn't need it. The realization struck him like a plasma lance. There were no humans aboard. The Lolan, his chief scientist, confirmed it moments later, her voice hollow. The vessel, it's empty. No organic signatures, no neural activity, just machines. Malvar's mandibles twitched. Then who commands it? The answer came not from the Lolan, but from the receipt itself. A final transmission pulsed across the fleet, unencrypted, uncompressed, raw data bleeding into every open channel. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't a plea. It was a list. Thousands of them. Commander Sarah Harriman, Captain David Reynolds, Lieutenant Elias Voss. On and on they scrolled. A relentless tide of human lives lost. Each one tagged with coordinates, dates, the exact moment their ships had been obliterated by Malthari guns, and beneath each name, the signatures of the Malthari officers who had given the order. Malvar's own authorization codes flickered among them. His blood ran cold. This wasn't just a record. This wasn't just revenge. This was accounting. The receipt had been built for one purpose, to ensure the galaxy remembered. Not just the battles, not just the victories, but the cost, the faces behind the casualty reports, the voices silenced. And now, it was broadcasting them to every listening post, every neutral world, every species that had turned a blind eye to the war. The Malthari had thought humanity broken. They were wrong. The receipt wasn't a warship, it was a witness, and it had just sworn testimony. Malvar's claws clenched. Across the fleet, panic spread like a virus. Some ships powered down their weapons, their commanders unwilling to add another name to the list. Others turned tail, their crystalline hulls shimmering as they fled into the dark. But the receipt didn't pursue, it didn't need to. Its work was done, deep in its core. The last of its ancient printers shuddered, spitting out one final sheet, a single line of text, crisp and unyielding. Paid in full. Then, with the same quiet precision with which it had entered the system, the receipt powered down. Its lights dimmed, its engines cooled, and in the silence of the void, it waited. For the galaxy to read the fine print, the silence that followed was worse than any battle cry. Across the Malthari armada, command decks flickered with uneasy violet light, the air thick with the ozone scent of ionized panic. Malvar's crest trembled. His usually pristine silver scales dulled under the weight of realization. The receipt hadn't fired a single shot. It hadn't needed to. It had done something far more devastating. It had published. The data stream from the human vessel had already propagated, slithering through every open comm buoy, every relay station, every diplomatic channel in the quadrant. Neutral worlds would see it. Rival empires would dissect it. The Malthari's carefully curated narrative of a just pacification lay in ruins, replaced by cold, unflinching records of orbital bombardments, of cities reduced to glass, of the receipt's own scars, each one logged, each one accounted for. And now, the galaxy was watching. Malvar's claws flexed against the smooth aerogel surface of his command console. His secondary heart pounded in sync with the warning chimes echoing through the fleet. Somewhere in the tactical net, a junior officer was hyperventilating. "High Commander." The Lowland's voice was a rasp, his bioluminescent markings pulsing erratically. "The human vessel is hailing us." A ripple of dread passed through the bridge crew. This wasn't a demand for surrender. This wasn't even a threat. It was a transaction. The screen flickered to life. Commander Sarah Harriman's face filled the display, her expression as unreadable as the void behind her. No grand speech, no righteous fury. Just 3 words, scrolling beneath her image in both Malthari glyphs and Terran script. Reparations or embargo. A chime. Then another across the fleet, targeting locks dissolved, not from the receipt but from their own allies. The Rixian commerce guilds, the Kasari trade consortiums, one by one, the financial hubs that fed the Malthari war machine blinked out of contact, their crystalline data spires going dark as automated protocols severed ties. Malvar's stomachs twisted. They had gambled on humanity's isolation, on the galaxy's indifference. They had lost. The receipt hadn't just exposed their crimes. It had weaponized accounting, every stolen resource, every raised colony, all of it, itemized in perfect damning detail. And now the bill had come due. On the view screen, Harriman didn't smile. She didn't need to. The silence stretched. Then, deep in the Malthari flagship's core, a console lit up. A single line of text, crisp and unyielding, mirrored across every ship in the armada. Acknowledged. Outside, the receipt's running lights dimmed. Its massive railguns, still cold from disuse, remained silent. It had won without firing a shot. And as the first of the Malthari treasury ships began rerouting toward human space, their holds heavy with palladium and regret, the galaxy learned a new truth. Never underestimate a species that keeps receipts. The receipt hung in the void like a silent judge, its running lights dimmed to a patient, watchful glow. The battle had never been fought with kinetic fire or plasma lances, only ledgers, timestamps, and the unassailable weight of truth. Malvar's command spire, once thrumming with the arrogance of an empire, now felt like a tomb. The air tasted of ionized regret, the scent of ozone mingling with the bitter tang of defeat. His tendrils, usually coiled in regal poise, hung limp. The console before him still displayed that single merciless word, acknowledged. It wasn't surrender. It was receipt. Across the armada, Malthari treasury ships disengaged from formation, their crystalline hulls shimmering as they pivoted toward human space. The sight should have been impossible. A sovereign fleet turning its wealth over to a species they had dismissed as primitive. Yet there they were, their holds brimming with stolen palladium, their navigational arrays locked onto coordinates dictated by human auditors. Thalolan, his bioluminescent markings flickering erratically, stared at the data streams. "They knew," he whispered, the words brittle. "Every transaction, every deception, they tracked it all." Malvar didn't answer. His mind reeled through the implications. Humanity hadn't just outmaneuvered them. They had out-administered them. While the Malthari had woven grand schemes of conquest, the humans had been quietly, meticulously keeping records. On the view screen, Commander Harriman's face remained impassive. She hadn't gloated, hadn't demanded submission. She had simply presented the facts and watched as the galaxy's indifference crumbled under the weight of evidence. Outside, the Receipt's drones still hovered, their sleek forms humming with latent threat. They weren't warships, they were bailiffs, their presence, a reminder, the verdict had been rendered. Compliance was not optional. A chime sounded, a priority transmission routed through secure channels. Malthari hesitated, then activated it. The message was brief, a single sentence, translated into flawless Malthari script. Humanity prefers peace, but we excel at accountability. The words hung in the air, heavier than any weapon. Malthari exhaled, his body sagging under the weight of understanding. The humans hadn't needed fleets. They hadn't needed brute force. They had weaponized transparency. And in doing so, they had unraveled an empire built on shadows. The Receipt's lights pulsed once, then faded entirely. Its mission was complete, but its legacy was just beginning. Across the armada, Malthari crews worked in stunned silence, rerouting cargo, updating ledgers, preparing for the long journey to deliver what was owed. Somewhere in the dark, a human drone adjusted its trajectory, ensuring the course was followed. Malthari watched it all, his pride ash in his mouth. The galaxy had learned a new truth today, and it would never forget. The Malthari armada drifted in uneasy silence, their once proud warships now reduced to reluctant couriers. The Receipt had vanished into the void, its work done, but its presence lingered like the afterimage of a supernova, imprinted on retinas, on minds, on history. Malthari stood at the observation deck, his crystalline fingers pressed against the translucent aerogel pane. The stars beyond were cold and different. They did not care for empires or reckonings, but he did. His people had built their civilization on elegance, on the flowing currents of controlled energy, on the belief that power was meant to be wielded with precision. And yet, the humans, chaotic, blunt, relentless, had undone them with a single stroke. Not with fire, not with force, but with numbers. Accountability, the Lolan approached. Her bioluminescent markings dimmed in deference to the moment. She carried a data slate, its surface alive with scrolling figures, shipments recalculated, resources reallocated, debts tallied with merciless accuracy. They did not even gloat, she murmured, her voice barely disturbing the charged air between them. Malthari exhaled, his breath fogging the pain before him. That was the cruelty of it. The humans had not demanded submission. They had not reveled in their victory. They had simply presented the facts, and in doing so, forced the Malthari to confront the rot at the heart of their own empire. Across the armada, crews worked with quiet desperation. Cargo holds once filled with war machines now overflowed with restitution. Rare minerals, energy cores, even the sacred atmospheric condensers that powered Malthari cities. Each item was logged, each transaction verified by the silent human drones that shadowed their every move. Malthari's mandibles tightened. He had expected battle. He had prepared for defiance, for last stands, for the glorious fury of a dying empire. But this was worse. The humans had made them complicit in their own undoing. A chime sounded, an incoming transmission, not from the humans, but from the High Synod. Malthari hesitated before accepting, already knowing what he would see. The faces of the ruling caste flickered into view, their aurora, hued features drawn with something he had never witnessed before. Shame. Malthari, the first voice intoned. The recompense has been approved. A pause. The weight of millennia pressed down upon them all. The humans were thorough. Of course they were. Malthari closed his eyes. He thought of Commander Harriman's voice, calm and unyielding. He thought of Captain Reynolds, standing alone on that observation deck, a single soldier holding the line against an empire. And he understood. Now, the true horror of humanity. They did not conquer, they did not destroy. They simply made you see, and once you saw, you could never unsee. The transmission ended. Around him, the ship hummed with reluctant purpose, carrying its cargo toward a future the Malthari had never envisioned. Malvar turned from the stars. There was work to do. Section Fey Aftermath. The Malthari fleet did not return to the homeworld immediately. Instead, they lingered at the edge of the system, their ships drifting like wounded leviathans, their bioluminescent panels dimmed in a display of collective mourning. The humans had not fired a single shot, yet the damage was undeniable. Malvar stood in the observation chamber, his hands resting against the crystalline surface of the viewport. Below him, the planet spun, blue and green, alive in ways the Malthari had once dismissed as primitive. Now he saw it differently. The scars of human wars were still there. Yes, the skeletal remains of old battlefields, the faint traces of radiation where cities had once burned. But so too were the signs of something else. Forests reclaiming the ruins, towers of glass and steel rising where rubble had once been. The humans had not merely survived their own destruction, they had learned from it. A soft chime echoed through the chamber. The door slid open, and first voice Kethis entered, her aurora, lit features subdued. She did not speak at first, merely stood beside him, her gaze fixed on the world below. "They will expect us to retaliate," she said at last. Malvar exhaled, watching his breath fog the crystalline pain. "Will we?" Kethis hesitated, a rare thing for a Malthari of her rank. "No," she admitted. "Not now, not after." This, Malvar understood. The humans had not defeated them with weapons, but with something far more devastating. Perspective. The Malthari had spent centuries believing themselves the pinnacle of evolution, the rightful shepherds of the galaxy, and yet, in a single encounter, humanity had unraveled that certainty. They had forced the Malthari to see themselves as they truly were. And that was a wound no fleet could avenge. Outside, the stars burned cold and distant. Somewhere among them, human ships moved, their engines humming with quiet purpose. They were not waiting for the Malthari to strike back. They were simply moving forward. Malvar turned from the viewport. "Then we do the same." Kethis inclined her head, the closest thing to agreement she would ever give, and for the first time in Malthari history, an empire bowed, not to force, but to truth.